Hello and welcome to our Future Transactions podcast, brought to you by Forces Children Scotland thanks to funding from the Scottish Veterans Fund. Future Transactions supports families to prepare financially for when the time comes to enter civilian life. From providing useful information and advice to listening to the lived experience of veteran families, we hope you find our podcast useful. Today we're talking to Ed from the NHS, who's the principal lead on the NHS Armed Forces Talent Programme. So hi Ed, lovely to have you here.
Thanks very much.
So could you just start by giving us a bit of background on you, how you ended up in your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a forces background myself. So I joined the regular army in 2009, served the Royal Regiment of Scotland until 2016, and then transitioned to being a reservist. My role is very funny. I had never considered NHS Scotland because classically my dad was a doctor, mum was a nurse, so my head immediately went to, well, it's clinical roles that are involved there. And it was only when someone who I'd known from the army had put on their own personal LinkedIn page that they were looking at getting a team put together for the Armed Forces Talent Programme to reach out if you were interested. I did that, we went for a coffee, and then a few months later, went through the application process and ended up as part of the team. That person has since moved on, so I've now got the privilege of heading up the Armed Forces Talent Programme. So it was not the first thing I did from exiting. The military. I think a lot of people don't find their job forever as soon as they leave. I certainly had a bit of a potted path towards it, having run businesses and gone into startups and retrained as a financial advisor and all these different things. But actually, it was when I sort of saw this opportunity to be part of an organisation that was bigger than yourself, values driven. It really appealed to me, and so I sort of jumped at the opportunity of it.
Yeah, it's great. It's always interesting how people end up in the roles that they're in. So can you just talk to us a little bit about what the NHS Armed Forces Talent Programme is and how did it come about, if you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So the NHS is constantly looking to ensure it's got a sustainable workforce, and we want the best quality people in there as well. The overall and simplified mission of the Armed Forces Talent Programme is to encourage more people from the Armed Forces community as a whole into a sustainable NHS Scotland workforce. And we do that by trying to remove the barriers to entry. So some of that can be just sessions to help people understand what is the NHS, what is the structure, what are the various roles, what are the pay associated with each of the roles, and what's the application process. So once people understand that, they can then get into their own steam and look for any roles that are available. We also put in a number of initiatives. The key one that we're focusing on at the moment is some paid placements where we go out to the boards within NHS Scotland and say, would you like to offer paid placement for members of the Armed Forces community? So that could be veterans who have left for over 20, 30 years. It could be someone who's on their last day of service. It could be a spouse or partner who has, just moved to Scotland, has just been based there and is looking for, employment in their new surroundings. Or indeed, children who are very capable, resilient, have built up an array of skills that they maybe don't understand because it's just normal to them and the people that they associate with. But interestingly for me, I remember in my very first job, my first boss, his kids were jumping around on a trampoline in the back garden, and a few years on now, they were 4, 5 and 6 or something at the time, and now they are young, confident, resilient adults who work with my wife, who running her business, and we've put them in charge of running different areas. So we understand, and with the program, understand some of that skill set that is maybe not spoken about so much. And as with anything, people, as I did around the NHS, I had my formed opinion, clinical roles, and that is far from the case. But equally, from the NHS, people will have their opinions of what life is like within the forces, whether people will be really shouty or, they're just used to being outside and getting wet and muddy or on the sea or, whatever the case might be. So we look to not only go out to the armed forces community to help people better understand the variety of roles and how good a fit they actually are for it, but we also work internally with the NHS boards to get them to understand about the armed forces community and the differences within it, because I think it's an overarching way of categorizing people but someone who's left for 15 years and a child of someone who's served, are two very different people who'll have a different skill sets, but we understand that they can all be brought to great effect to be used within NHS Scotland.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about before the podcast started how the NHS, all of the NHSs within the UK is like possibly the biggest employer in the world,
absolutely.
and that's not just doctors and nurses,
absolutely.
obviously.
Yeah. No, we don't have that many. It'd be nice.
Yeah, in a perfect world, but how do you think the NHS and the armed forces align in terms of values and skills, and why that makes it quite a good transition into the NHS?
Yeah, I often sort of look at it and think, if I was describing an organisation that was people-focused, output-orientated, values-driven, with roles that looked at everything from leading teams, managing projects, sustaining buildings, keeping track of equipment, I could be talking about either the military or the NHS. So everything that you can do within one, you could do within the other. Now, we're obviously looking at trying to attract the armed forces community into the NHS. So what we look to try and do through some of our sessions is get people to understand that. So if someone has had a role, whether it is within any branch of the armed forces, or indeed, as a family member, they'll be able to bring their values or the fact they've had to move around every 2 years and build resilience, and then be able to evidence that when they're applying for roles. I think within any sort of organisation, whether it's public sector, private sector, or anyone looking for a certain role, having an understanding about how you can evidence your previous experiences is really key. So that's what we try and do. On a number of occasions, I've seen people show me their applications. They wonder why they're not, getting to the next stage. And actually, there's a load of great information in there. It's just tailoring it. So one thing that we do is run sessions around sort of understanding this, and they can easily be found on our website. If people just search for Armed Forces Talent Programme NHS Scotland, there's loads of information there. And then, as I say, it's great if people from the Armed Forces community are there, but also sort of further afield to be able to see all the vacancies that are available, and you really can see the wide range that are not only the type of role, but where they're based within different parts of the organisation. Because one thing, again, it's once you're embedded in an organisation, it's only then you start to truly understand it. But NHS Scotland is broken down into 22 separate boards. 14 of them are geographically located. So you have NHS Highland, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, NHS Lothian, and so on. And then you've got 8 national boards that look to support the boards who are giving that sort of primary and secondary care, as it were. So, huge amounts of opportunity there. And we know that the Armed Forces community are perfect fits for the vast majority of roles that are available.
Yeah, it's great to see how they align and kind of fit together quite nicely. So, and you kind of talked about there's a vast amount of roles. So what are the different types of roles within the organisation? Maybe focusing on ones that aren't necessarily clinical, because a lot of people already kind of know about them. Yeah,
absolutely. So we've got over 350 different roles, and it's one of those, if you take your time to sort of think about what it takes to just run one hospital and everything that is there. So on the last set of placements, we had someone who was working in the facilities department, looking at how to change different parts of a building. So it was very much almost construction project focused. There are team managers, there are educators, because everyone needs to be able to develop. Those with regulated qualifications that need to be kept up to date, need to have that sort of education piece. So not necessarily teachers, but facilitators of education. Everything from porters right through to project managers, but also each board has an executive level. So there's a chief executive, head of finance, marketing. There is the sort of in-house comms team as well. So there is such a range there that it's really difficult to just say, here's the key ones, and it's really there. What we like to do is give people the ability to apply for any role that's there, just almost using a set formula about how to evidence it, which we'll, I'm sure, talk about in another podcast as well.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be talking about that in another podcast. And how can people get involved, and especially young people who are maybe looking from the Armed Forces community to get involved in the programme?
Absolutely. Well, what I would suggest is registering your interest in the Armed Forces Talent Programme, which means you'd go onto our mailing list, and we try and do the hard work for people. So we send out opportunities weekly. One of the difficulties is I can't say, apart from a couple of initiatives that are run on a sort of time-led basis, exactly what roles or what apprenticeships are coming up at what time. Often there'll be factors in the background, funding, available staff to take people through on apprenticeships and make sure that people are getting, you know, the best experience from it. But what I would say is there are a variety of different routes into NHS Scotland. You can directly apply for vacancies. I think, you know, as of today, there's about 800 vacancies, you know, at this time, and they will constantly be changing because the workforce is about 180,000 strong. So, you know, people retire, people move roles, all that sort of stuff. But there are apprenticeships, there are volunteering options, there are programs that are run for certain sectors. For example, the Royal College of Nursing has a cadet scheme where people are taken through some work experience, and you know, young people are now inspired by that. And yes, whilst they're going into nursing roles, they're also seeing different elements of the NHS and going, well, actually, I want to be a part of this environment, but nursing might not be for me. So they then concentrate on trying to get the skills and develop into a different area where they want to be part of that organisation, which is values driven. But yeah, as you say, not necessarily in a clinical role, but on that side of life, it's not closed off to everyone who hasn't got a degree in, you know, a certain field. There's a lot of work now going into Earn As You Learn, Earn As You Learn initiatives to ensure that we are not ostracising certain people within society who, you know, maybe aren't as academic, but actually would make a fantastic nurse because they're very caring. They are able to do all the things that are required. You know, it's not about doing a degree because it's actually doing the role and making sure that you're providing that care in the front line.
Yeah, I think that's really good because we talk about at Forces Children Scotland how a lot of young people learn in different ways, so it's great that there's those other options and they don't have to think, if I don't go to university, I can't ever be in that role. And I think that's a really good thing for children, young people to know, so they don't panic and they kind of know the different routes they can go down. So is there any last remarks you have on the programme you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, I think the key thing is around anything is to make informed decisions. So this might be something that really interests people, or it might not, but my sort of biggest sort of fear is that people might be a good fit, but they don't know about it. So my suggestion would be for people to just have a look at the website. It'll take them 2 minutes. As you mentioned there about people with different sort of, you know, ways of learning. I'm dyslexic myself, so I, you know, much prefer videos and stories and all that sort of stuff. So I've made sure that they're on the website, or my team rather have. You know, there's ways of finding out about it. So if you just searched for the Armed Forces Talent Programme, NHS Scotland, you can have a look at that, see if there are any roles that are going to pique people's interests and be a really good fit for them, hopefully in an organisation where they sort of have their values aligned and feel good about what they're doing every day.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you so much for coming on our podcast. An
absolute pleasure.
And we'd encourage everyone to check out the Future Transactions website and also the NHS Armed Forces Talent Programme website. And anyone can check out the vacancies page, of course, for NHS Scotland. So thank you again, Ed, and hope everyone enjoyed this.
Thank you.